How Satan stops our prayers. Combat in the heavenly realm. By John Mulindi, November 2000. I want to share a testimony with you of someone who is saved, someone who had been serving the devil. And when this man gave his testimony, it so challenged me, I did not want to believe it. I had to go 10 days before the Lord in fasting, asking him, Lord, is this true? And at that time, the Lord began to teach me what happens in the spiritual realm when we pray. Now, this man was born after his parents dedicated themselves to Lucifer. When he was still in the womb, they made so many rituals dedicating him to serve Lucifer. When he was 4 years old, he began to exercise his spiritual power, and his parents began fearing him. And when he was 6 years old, his father surrendered him to the witches to go and be trained. And by 10 years, he was doing great things in the kingdom of the devil, and he was feared by the normal witches. He was still a young boy, but he was so terrible in the things he did. He grew up to be a young man in his 20s with so much bloodshed on his hands. Killed at will. He had the ability to go outside of his body through transcendental meditation. He could levitate. Sometimes his body would lift off the ground and stay in the air. And sometimes he could go into a trance and come out of his body would remain behind, and he would go out into the world. This is called astro traveling. And this guy was used by Satan to destroy so many churches, to break down the churches, and to destroy many pastors. One day, he was assigned to destroy a church that was full of prayer. There were so many divisions in this church and many confusions. And he began to work on the attack of this church. But at that time, the pastor called a fast for the whole church. As the church began to fast, there was a lot of repentance and a lot of reconciliation. And the people came together and they began to pray for the work of the Lord in their midst. And they continued interceding and crying to God to have mercy and intervene in their lives. As the days went by, this man was coming again and again with demon spirits against this church. But there was a word of prophecy that came telling the Christians to rise up and wage warfare against the powers of darkness that were attacking the church. So one day, this man leaves his body in his room and goes astro traveling. He leads a mighty force of demonic spirits against this church. Now this is his testimony. His spirit was moving in the air over the church, trying to attack it, but there was a covering of light over the church. And suddenly, there was an army of angels that attacked them, and there was fighting in the air. All the demons fled, but he was arrested by the angels. Yes, arrested by the angels. He saw himself being held by about 6 angels, and they brought him through the roof of the church, down before the church altar. There he was, and the people were praying. They were deep in prayer in the spiritual warfare, binding and breaking and casting out. The pastor was on the platform leading the prayers and the warfare. The Spirit of the Lord spoke to the pastor. The yoke has been broken. and the victim is there before you. Help him through deliverance. As the pastor opened his eyes, he saw this young man collapse there. His body was with him. He was in his body. The young man says he doesn't know how his body joined him. He left it back at his house. But there he was in his body, and he didn't know how he entered, except the angels had carried him through the roof. Now, these things are difficult to believe, but the pastor silenced the church and told the church what the Lord had told him, and asked the young man, "Who are you?" The young man was trembling as the demons began coming out of him. So they prayed for deliverance, and afterwards he began to share his life. This young man has now come to the Lord and is an evangelist, preaching the gospel. He is being used by the Lord mightily in setting other people free by deliverance. Now, it was difficult for me to believe this story. So one night I went to a dinner, and the reason I went to the dinner is that someone told me that this young man was going to be there. And I was so curious to see him and to see if his story was true. So at the dinner, this man gave his testimony. He talked about many things. Sometimes he cried because of the things he did. He shared how he led expositions into the air. He would go with other satanic agents and lots of demon spirits into the air. It was like a shift, and you got to go work on your shift. So he had a set time for him to go out and wage war in the heavenlies. And listen to what he said. He said that in the heavenlies, in the spiritual realm, if the land is covered under a blanket of darkness, that blanket is so thick, it's like a rock, and it covers the whole area. And these spirits are able to go on top of this as well as below this blanket. And from that level, they influence the events on earth. When the evil spirits and human satanic agents leave their shifts, they go down on the earth at the points of covenant, even waters or on the land at points of covenant, for refreshing of their spirit. And how do they refresh their spirit? Now listen to this. By sacrifices that people give at the altars. There could be sacrifices in open witchcraft, sacrifices in bloodshed of all types, including abortion, including warfare, and human sacrifices, and animal sacrifices. There could be sacrifices of sexual immorality, where people go into sexual perversion and all kinds of promiscuity. And these sinful acts actually give strength to these evil powers. And there are many different types of sacrifices. He said that when satanic agents are up in the heavenly realm and the Christians begin to pray on the earth, the prayers of the Christians appear to them in three forms. All prayer appears like smoke that rises up to the heavens. Now, some people's prayers, they appear like smoke, and the smoke goes drifting along and disappears in the air. These prayers come from people who have sin in their lives, and they're not willing to deal with it. Their prayers are so weak, and they're blown away and disappear in the air. The other type of prayer is also like smoke that rises up until it reaches this rock, but it does not break through the rock. These are usually people who try to purify themselves, but they lack the faith in what they're doing as they pray, they usually ignore the other important aspects that are needed when someone prays. The third type of prayer is like smoke that is filled with fire. As it rises up, it is so hot that when it reaches the rock begins to melt like wax. It pierces the rock and goes through. Many times, as people begin to pray, their prayer looks like the first type. But as they continue praying, their prayer changes and becomes like the second type of prayer. And as they continue praying, suddenly it ignites into fire. And their prayers become so powerful, they pierce through the rock. Many times, the evil agents would notice that the prayers were changing and becoming very close to the state of fire. Then these agents would communicate with other spirits on the earth, and they would tell them, "Distract that person from prayer. Stop them praying. Pull them out." Now, many Christians yield to these distractions. They are pressing through. They're repenting. They're allowing the word to check their spirit. Faith is building up. Their prayers are becoming more focused. Then the devil sees their prayers are gaining strength, and the distractions begin. Telephones ring. Sometimes in the middle of very intense prayer, the telephone rings, and you think you can go answer the phone and then come back and continue praying. But when you come back, you go back to the beginning. And that's what the devil wants. Other kinds of distractions come your way, even if it means touching your body and bringing you some pain somewhere. Even if it means making you hungry and you want to go to the kitchen and fix something to eat. As long as they can get you out of that place, they have defeated you. Pastors, you must teach your people how to pray. Set aside some time, and not just for some casual prayer. They can do that the rest of the day. Once in a day, a Christian should have a time when they are totally focused, wholeheartedly on God, nothing distracting them. And if people persist in this type of prayer and allow themselves to be inspired in the Spirit and keep going, something happens in the Spirit. The fire touches the rock and it melts the rock. When the melting begins, it is so hot, no demon spirit can stand it, and no human spirit can stand it either. They all flee. They all run away. Then there comes an opening in the spiritual realm. And as soon as this comes, all this trouble in prayer stops. The person who is praying on the ground just feels like prayer is suddenly smooth, so enjoyable, so powerful and intense. And I discovered that at that moment, we normally lose conscience of time and other things. Not that we become disorderly, but God takes care of our time. But it's like you lay down everything and you hook up with God. With prayers going through, from that moment there can be no resistance at all. And the person praying will continue as long as he wants. There's no resistance that can stop him. And after he finishes praying, the hole remains open. And he said that the people, they rise out of that place of prayer and they walk out. This open hole moves along with them. They're no longer operating under the blanket. Now they are operating under open heavens. And he said that in that state, the devil cannot do what he wants against them. And the presence of the Lord is like a pillar from heaven resting on their lives. they're protected. And there's so much power inside that pillar that as they move around, the presence touches other people. It discerns what the enemy has done in other people. And as they talk to people, and those people are standing with them, they come inside this pillar. And as long as they stay inside that pillar, all the bondages of the enemy weaken. So when these people who have this spiritual breakthrough share Jesus Christ with sinners, their resistance is low. It's so easy to bring them through. When they pray for the sick or pray about things, the presence which is there makes all the difference. And this man said that the devil hates such people. And if there are places where prayer is regularly being prayed through like that, the presence comes upon that place and does not leave. So even the people who don't know God, when they come into this place, suddenly all the bondages are weakened. And if someone cared just to minister to them patiently and with love, they can easily be pulled through. Not by power, not by might, but by the Spirit of God who is present. And if no one bothers about these people, and they come into his presence, they feel convicted, and they begin to debate whether to yield or not. But if they're not pulled through, when they walk away from this place, bondages get stronger. And the devil